broadcast. All right, and we're letting attendees in. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the New York Counts 2020 Rebuilding New York Census as Foundation Conference. We are so excited to present this series to everyone. Just to frame our week, New York State is ranked 38th in self-response rates for the census. The country is at a 62% self-response rate, and New York State is running 5 percentage points behind that, and New York City about 9 percentage points behind that. What does that mean? For any number that we are below average, that means we're giving our resources and representation to another state that's above average. And right now, we know what we've been facing. We've been facing the epidemic, which has its medical implications and its economic implications. And we also, as a society, are reckoning with centuries of structural and systemic racism. And so what we know is that the census is actually a path to our way out of this. That I'm not saying it's going to give us everything, but it brings us part of the way there. It is the foundation. And with that, and I realized I didn't introduce myself. I was so excited to start the day. I'm Meeta Anand, the Census 2020 Senior Fellow at the New York Immigration Coalition and facilitator and convener of New York Counts 2020. With day 2 of our conference, we thought we'd bring together industry leaders from New York State who are able to speak to us about how and why the census is so important to them and their member groups and constituents. So we are super excited about the day. And I'm even more excited to present our moderator of the day, Melva Miller. Melva, for anyone who knows her, is simply described as a force of nature. I think that's the easiest way to describe her. Melva, I think, is single-handedly responsible for about 30% of the response rate that we have right now. And she has been all over New York City, just telling everyone about the census. And she's been doing this in her capacity as Executive Vice President for the census at Association for a Better New York, also known as ABNY. So Melva, over to you, my sister in census.
Thank you so much, Meeta. And thank you for that introduction. And I will take the credit for the 30%. I don't have, it's not because of me, it's because of all of us on this call, but I'll take the credit. So thank you, my sister in census. I am really excited to facilitate today's conversation with sector leaders across the board around the importance of the census and what that means to New York City as it looks to rebuild and rebound from recent months. As you know, really in this moment in time, we have the opportunity to be seen, to be heard, and to be counted, and that we have the opportunity to build power and accountability, right? With recent events, including COVID-19 and the outrage of racial injustice across the country, once again, we see sort of the inequities in our society. And when we talk about sort of getting our fair share, the number one way we can do that is by participating in the census, right? So I'm sure everyone on the call knows the importance of the census. They know about the billions of dollars in federal funding that gets distributed annually based on how many people live here, the political representation. We get, the service-based funding that goes to our vulnerable communities, right? Now more than ever, we need to make sure that New York State and New York City gets its fair share, and it is an all hands on deck, right? Across sectors, we all need to band together to make sure that we are getting out the message around how important it is and also getting people to complete the census, right? So now is the time not just talk about it, but let's figure out ways to facilitate ways for people to actually complete the census. So I am really honored to facilitate today's conversation because we have some really great guests, most of whom I've worked with in many different capacities. But they're all here to share sort of their wisdom on sort of what they've been doing around the census and why the census is so important to their sector. So just in case you are not aware of who our speakers are today, We are very, very lucky to receive introductory remarks and welcoming remarks from the Suffolk County Executive, Steve Bellone. Then from our panelists, we have Sam Tweedy, who is the Chief Partnership and Impact Officer at Robinhood. We have President Mulgrew, who is the president of the United Federation of Teachers, UFT, one of the strongest organized labor unions in New York City. We have Carlos Cicera, who is the president and CEO of the New York Building Congress. And we have worked together in, again, many, many capacities. We have Tom Gretsch, my friend, who is the president and CEO of the Queens Chamber of Commerce. He's going to talk a little bit about what the Queens Chamber and what the business community in Queens have been doing. And we have another one of my sisters in Census, and sort of like my boss, because she's on my organizing and action committee, Jennifer Jones Austin, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. So with that, I'd like to ask Steve Bellone to say a few words. He's been the Suffolk County Executive since January 1st of 2012, and he is only the 8th county executive in county history. County Executive Bellone represents more than 1.5 million residents, and his focus has really been on government reform, boosting economic development to create local jobs and lasting jobs for Suffolk County, improving Long Island's water quality to protect the region's water supply, and enhancing the quality of life of Suffolk County residents by improving public safety and investing in county parks and roads. Suffolk County, in partnership with its coalition of community-based, public, private, and faith partners, have really been diligently working on the east end of Long Island to get out the count for the 2020 census. Now we'll hear from County Executive Bellone about some of the things they've been doing and to welcome us today. County Executive?
Thank you very much, Melba. I really appreciate it. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to all the members of the New York Counts Committee, as well as all of the distinguished panelists here today for this really important discussion and conversation. And I want to say, first off, a thank you to everyone on this call who is a part of this effort, who is leading this effort, who is working on making sure that everyone gets counted, because really, it is not an exaggeration to say that everything is on the line here. We are in the midst of an unprecedented crisis, at least in modern times, in our nation and for communities across the country. And that includes, of course, our communities here. And, you know, we've been working on the census. We know how important the census is. Everyone on this call understands why the census is important. And we began these efforts back in January of 2019 because we understand the need for everyone to be counted. I want to thank my team, Vanessa Baird-Streeter. We worked with the Health and Welfare Council, Rebecca Sannon, over 100 organizations that we've been collaborating with across this county and across Long Island. We are one region here to work to get people counted. But COVID-19 really in many ways has just emphasized the importance, the critical importance of the census. I just did a press conference earlier today where I was talking about the need for the federal government to provide the appropriate level of disaster assistance. Otherwise, communities are not going to be able to recover here. We're looking at economic devastation, the inequities that this virus has exposed so much that have only grown wider now as a result. Those inequities get exacerbated even further. This devastation gets extended out a decade or more without that federal disaster assistance. That really underscores what we're talking about here, the census, because this literally means for the next decade, what we will be able to bring to our state, to our region, to address these challenges and these issues that have been exposed here. And that's why our group here in the county and across Long Island have been working so hard. And again, I thank all of the organizations, over 100 community-based organizations that we've been collaborating with. We've been doing presentations and meetings with different organizations and webinars and Zoom now, which is now a part of our lexicon here. We used the COVID-19 crisis, even in the midst of dealing with this public health crisis, We knew how important the census was. So at our hotspot testing sites, we made sure we were giving out census information to everyone who was getting tested. Same thing at our antibody testing sites, giving out the census information, encouraging people to participate. And even our food distribution sites and our grab and go food sites, where we were providing this much needed relief, encouraging people to say, this census, filling out the census, critical so that we can have the resources we need to recover as a region moving forward. So I really do believe that this work that happens every decade, more important than ever. While we are struggling and fighting to get the appropriate level of disaster assistance from the federal government so that we can recover as a region, as a state, we also have to understand, and we cannot forget, that the census is basically the same thing. We will undercut our efforts on one front if we are not fully engaged and not focused like a laser in making sure we are getting everyone in this region counted, everyone in this state counted. And that's what we're trying to do in Suffolk County. And I truly do welcome everyone and appreciate everyone's extraordinary efforts here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, County Executive Malone. We really appreciate your enthusiasm, your commitment to making sure the region is counted, and really your leadership in coordinating the massive number of community organizations within Suffolk County and partnering throughout the state, right? So it's not just within your county, it's the work that you've done to connect all of the work throughout your state. And we are very lucky to have you as a partner. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Melba.
So next, our next speaker is President Michael Mulgrew. We all know labor has a history and a reputation of being awesome organizers, right? Amongst sort of what they do in representing their membership, they also have been very effective in organizing around issues that are really important to the quality of life of not only their members, but all of society. So President Mulgrew is the 5th president of the United Federation of Teachers, UFT, as we know it, which represents nearly 200,000 New York City public schools, educators, and school-related professionals, as well as childcare providers, nurses, adult education instructors, retired members, and other organizations. Since his presidency began in July of 2009, President Mulgrew has been working to promote issues that include economic fairness, immigration reform, equality, social justice, and the union's humanitarian efforts. One of the latest issues has been the 2020 census. Understanding exactly how the census impacts schools and our children for that matter, President Mulgrew has not only been leading the census charge for organized labor, but he has really made sure that the census is talked about in every public school. I'm really honored to introduce him as one of the panelists today. He is really taking this on in a big way. And now we'll hear from President Mulgrew.
Thank you, Melvin. Thank you. And thank you everyone who's on the call. I really do appreciate the fact that we've kept our focus at all times, that this is a job. We all understand the importance of it, and we have continued to coordinate and make sure that despite all of the challenges and obstacles around us, we are continuing to move forward to come up with a much better result than we did 10 years ago. So I really want to thank everyone, especially Abney and everybody else who's on the call right now. It is it's a great story that no one's been telling, that we continue to keep this moving throughout. For us here, clearly, you know, now when we first started the census piece, it was just about the census and why New York City and New York State needs to do so much better than it did last time. But as was just told by the county executive, that it's now a whole different ballgame now. You know, I spend 12 hours a day right now trying to figure out how to open schools safely. And I'll tell you all right now, the biggest challenge we're facing right now is we don't have the funding to do it safely. It's that simple. We can't buy enough PPE. We can't buy enough of the cleaning supplies. We can't do all of these other things. And we're fighting at a federal level just to do that through the HEROES Act at this moment. But it just compounds the importance of all of this, because what we'd be in a better place if we would have done 10 years ago. So that's what we've all committed to doing this. Now, I'm happy that we've moved into different things in different places. You know, phase one for us, I think Angel is on the call. Angel, if you could put up where we've been or where we went from phase one to phase two in all of our efforts. Thank you, Angel. Okay. So look, just Angel, just people can look at this part of it, but really go to the next slide because I want to talk about going from phase one to phase two. This is the big thing right here. So we all went through phase one. We did all the different organizations came out with their outreach. We were somewhat thwarted because at that point, we literally had hundreds of meetings set up using school buildings, which clearly we were not able to do. So what we did at that moment was we used all of the avenues that we still had access to, and we did what everyone else on this call was doing is we first started building what we called the educational process, just a complete put out everywhere why the census is important, what are we doing, and a lot of those efforts we saw all over the city. But then we quickly moved towards, all right, we had enough data probably by the middle of May, and I said, last time we all talked about targeting the lowest performing districts, and at that moment we were able to look at the 10 lowest performing districts at that point. So the first week of June, what we did was we put together a really heavy saturation of social media, mainly based through Facebook. And we did a targeting of the 10 lowest performing districts at that point in time. Now, since then, we've seen an increase overall of about 10.3%. But what we saw when we did this heavy targeting in these 10 lowest performing districts is we saw an average increase from June until just recently of 14.2%. So it's almost a 4% increase when we did this heavy saturation of the social media targeting. So we still have a period of time where we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to put our resources into that. I just don't see, you know, I think we really are pretty much struggling, and our hands are tied behind our back. I don't see us getting the ability to do, even though we were hoping we would if we got to, you know, in phase three, that we could do some more face-to-face meetings. But what's going on around the country, and because of what New York has already been through, that fear is much greater here, because I think, unlike most places, you know, we went through this and we learned a lesson, and we do not want to repeat that lesson. So for us, the big piece here is that when the social media targeting, the response rate definitely went up. Now, I will be honest, it was a heavy saturation. And you could see the ones that we did not target, even though there was a lift, it still was not the same. So anything we could do to help coordinate people, and as well as we're going to continue on our own, is this social media saturation, because it's definitely paying off for us, and it's paying off for the results in the census. And I just wanted to bring that to all of you, because I know as every day the news changes for all of us, and this is one piece. Where I kept the census team, and Angel's on right now, and he's really been our point. And I said, just you stay focused on this. You keep coming up with different strategies, start figuring out different things. And it wasn't just doing the social media through Facebook. It was we targeted our members in those 10 lowest performing districts to then also amplify locally. We asked them to get on more lists and more chats and different things that were going on inside of their communities to start spreading the word about Facebook. About the census. And that clearly has paid off at this moment. So I think it's a viable strategy that we need to really consider as we move forward, because it definitely paid. As I said, we were very happy that we were able to get that, you know, the 10% across the board, but the 14% in those areas that were so low performing with that targeting definitely has paid off. But again, we all know we got a long way to go. We know we have the Halloween, but I think we really should put a heavy push on this through the middle of August. And I think we should be able to get some more, even better results.
Thank you, President Mulgrew. And I know I have questions about that, and understanding sort of your expertise and how to actually do that. And, you know, again, I know that you are dealing with a lot right now as you guys are looking at opening up the schools. So I appreciate and I am happy to hear about your sustained commitment to the census, even as you deal with sort of your normal sort of work.
Yeah,
that
the
you
day job thing. Yeah. We have a great look, Angel and Cassie. We have a great team, and we remember we have all those captains who volunteered in every single district in the city. So they've been proven, you know, they really have a passion for this, and despite all we've been going through, they really want to see. They're very passionate about seeing New York do so much better, and so we just have to just continue to do the work and just grind it out. And what we find works, we just got to keep moving with it.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So next, we're going to hear from another one of my sisters in the census, Jennifer Jones Austin, as she pronounces it, who is a child and family advocate and is the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, FPWA. And FPWA is an anti-poverty policy and advocacy organization with over 170 member human service agencies operating throughout New York City. In her role at FPWA, she spearheaded the creation of the Interfaith Census Complete Count Coalition and is also a member of ABNY's Census 2020 committee working towards a complete and accurate census count this year. In March, Mayor de Blasio appointed JJA as the board chair of the New York City Board of Corrections, and they have just recently made some major announcements about that work. And she's also recently been appointed to the Fair Recovery Task Force charged with guiding the city administration's effort to reopening the economy and city life after the COVID-19 pandemic. While doing all of this, Ms. Jones Austin has remained steadfast in making sure that New York City works hard to achieve an accurate census count. And with that, I'd like to ask Ms. Jones Austin to tell us a little bit about her work.
Absolutely. So let me first say that I am delighted to be on this call. It's so good to know and appreciate that we all are as committed to ensuring the highest count possible as we were when we first began talking about this effort before COVID took hold of New York City. You know, we have remained vigilant, we've remained consistent and intentional about having the highest count possible. And so it's good to be on this event, on this panel with my colleagues and with you. So as you shared, I head up the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, FPWA, and it is a social policy and advocacy organization that works with human service agencies across the city. But we also work very closely with the faith community. Some of the human service agencies are faith-based, most of them are not, but we have many partners in the space of different religions. And when, about a little better than a year ago, when, we started saying, okay, the census is coming, the census is coming, the census is coming, it occurred to us that we needed to engage with faith community to do our very best to increase the census count. In the faith community, people often talk about prophets and people prophesying about, what is to come. And one of the things that I can't help but think about right now is perhaps we were prophesying about the criticality of the faith community in helping to increase the count. And perhaps we were prophesying about this moment that we're in, a moment where people who have many good reasons to be hesitant when it comes to engaging with government, and in recent weeks and months, that hesitation has all the more increased because of what has happened with COVID and, the different infection rates and hospitalization rates and death rates. Black persons infected 2.5 times as many as white people, Black persons being hospitalized 5 times more than white people, and the death rate the same. And the same holds true for Hispanics and Latinos, persons of Hispanic descent. And so, when you see that government is supposed to be there for you, and you're hearing something's happening in your community, you see your people falling left and right, and government saying, don't worry about COVID. It's hard to say, okay, now government's telling me to complete the census and give over more information. I don't know, right? When you see racism persisting and you see, disparate, treatment when it comes to policing and other forms of engagement with government, right? Education, our kids as connected to COVID, Black and brown kids have suffered the most when it comes to remote learning. It is hard for these communities to say, okay, the government is telling me to complete this census right now, let me get on board and do it. So prophesying, perhaps we didn't even realize it in the moment, how important faith community would be, and now is, in helping our communities to understand how vitally important, how critical, how like life and death, in many respects, completing the census is. I don't need to tell any of you on this panel, and probably not those who are listening, how it's so tied to our everyday living. But if we just think about COVID for a moment, right? We know about the child care block grant. We know about, representation in the House. We know about, how it will affect, street repairs and the like. But let's just think about this for a moment. Census counting affects funding for Medicaid. It affects funding related to building and establishing fine hospitals in communities. It has everything to do with education and the additional services and supports that sometimes lower income children and families need, special needs, right? Children with disabilities. Census count affects all of that. And what's happening right now with COVID? It's the children who are low income who are suffering because they don't have the tools and the resources that they need, right? It's the children and the families in low income communities that don't have quality health care who are suffering. And so the faith community has and must continue to step in and help people understand and appreciate. I know that you feel uncertain in this moment about whether or not government is there for you. But if you step away and are not counted in this moment, then government definitely won't be there for you. You won't have the Head Start and the child care classrooms that you need. You won't have funding flowing to your communities for the jobs that now need to be created in the wake of so much loss resulting from COVID. We need the faith community more than ever to say, I'm here, this is okay, you must do this. And so what have we been doing as a result of COVID that has kept us from being face-to-face in our houses of worship? We've been doing as much as we can by way of telephone banking, calling up people and saying, hey, how are you doing? Checking on you to make sure that you have the food that you need, other resources that you may need, but also you gotta complete that census. Have you done that? That's critically important. We've done mailings. Traditional mailings, because many people still, don't trust the texts. They don't trust the phone to give out information. So we've been doing mailings. But the thing that I think we can increasingly do more of is in our virtual services that we're holding in every faith community, whether it be the Christian community, Protestant, Catholic, whether it be the Jewish community, the Sikh community, the Hindu community, whether it be the Muslim community. We're all engaging virtually with each other in services and in other events. So we need to be reminding people in those events as well of the importance of completing the census. As Michael said, we've got a few more months to get this done, but every day matters. And we just need to lean in now, because we all know that, what happens when you put off until tomorrow what needs to be done today. Haste makes waste, and you never really get to where you need to be. So faith community is right in here, and we're going to keep on pushing. There's a website that people can visit. It's interfaithcensus2020.nyc, interfaithcensus2020.nyc, and on it, you'll find a toolkit that helps you to think about, your faith community and what you can do. We have the language for you to be able to speak in the most sincere and the clearest ways to your community. And then we've also just introduced a COVID-related toolkit that helps faith communities in this moment to think about, okay, how do we now engage in this COVID space all the more? Faith community is critically important. I know you're out there. Tell your faith leaders, your faith partners to get involved and do the work, because we right now represent that voice that, you know, for some who distrust government, find their trust and their faith in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jones-Austin. I don't know if to call you my sister, Jennifer Jones-Austin.
All of that.
No,
All of that.
thank you for reminding us of that, and also sort of putting it into context in terms of the time and the moment in time that we are in, and the difficulty that people have around government and government asking us to do things. You know, it's definitely an obstacle that we had to face before, and even more now.
Even more.
Yeah.
Even more.
So I appreciate you bringing that up, and I'm sure we'll have more questions for you around that in a moment. So I would like to introduce our next panel speaker, Tom Gretsch, who is a longtime friend and colleague of mine. He is the president and CEO of the Queens Chamber of Commerce, and they foster economic growth and prosperity in some of the most diverse communities in the most diverse county in, some say, the United States, I say the world. But he has his hands full working with diverse communities all across the United States. And really they do this by promoting the interest of business through advocacy, networking, and education. The Queens Chamber has been in existence for 106 years and is a true business resource and driver of prosperity, resulting in a very vibrant Queens. And I had the opportunity of working very closely with the Chamber and Tom through my work in economic development and community economic development for over 12 years. The Queens Chamber has partnered with ABNY earlier this year to launch a partnership to support the census through business outreach. And during the height of COVID-19 pandemic, the Chamber was steadfast in including census messaging and census work on every single one of his strategic recovery planning calls. So I thank him for that, keeping the census top of mind for the business industry and understanding how the business sector uses census data. So Tom, could you tell us a little bit about why the census is so important to the business sector and to Queens and to you?
Melba, thanks so much for the nice introduction. I really appreciate it. You know, everybody on this call knows when Melba does call and ask for help, it's truly a labor of love. And when we first got started with this, I knowing her as the deputy mayor for economic, I'm deputy mayor, listen to me, deputy borough president, should have been for economic development of the Queens Borough president. We jumped and we gathered the other 4 chambers of commerce who happily and willingly jumped on board. We had a couple of sessions in Manhattan. This is before the COVID with Carl Weisbrod. Just a terrific opportunity for all of us to grow and to prosper. Queens is, in fact, the most diverse place on earth. We've been struck probably more than any other place in the country with the COVID. So as the acting interim borough president says, we're the epicenter of the epicenter. More cases and more deaths. And that's not something we're proud of, it's just a fact. Greatly impacted the census 2020. I have some stats in front of me that I pulled from the web the other day in preparation for this. Queens is a number 3 and trying harder, kind of the story of our lives here. When it comes to the other 4 boroughs and New York State, I think our numbers are about 53%, where New York State's 57%, and we're working really hard at getting the messaging out. It's been a very, very tough time for everybody in our city and in our state and our country. But a couple of quick stats that help explain more about why the effort is so important. So in Queens County, our 90% of our membership, 90% have 10 or fewer employees. Many of those are undocumented. There's challenges that's faced by that, not to mention the different language challenges and the different ethnicities. You know, for the most part, we all get along pretty well. There's very little strife in Queens County, thank heavens. And we work really hard at doing that. But the operative thing is to get the messaging out all the time. You know, one of the challenges many businesses faced with the Triple P and the EIDL from the feds was their small size and their inability to manage the documentation. We are working really hard at getting the messaging out throughout the Queens Chamber of Commerce and all of our blasts. Whatever Melva sends us, we put out there. At the end of the day, I think Jennifer struck it well about hospitals and things like libraries. So many folks don't really understand the depth of the importance of this census tally. And again, you know, we are all New Yorkers. It's great to see Carlo on the line. He's a mentor and a friend that helped me get acclimated when I got here 5 years ago. Steve Ballone to the east. You know, we all are New Yorkers, and we all want to have as much as we possibly can get from the feds for all these projects. But if you think about things like, you know, the issues around congestion pricing and the build and the infrastructure that has to happen in the New York City area over the next 5 or 10 years, especially post-COVID, the census is essentially important. I took the liberty when this thing first started, as requested, to send the Facebook Live to thousands of our viewers at the Queen's Chamber. We're going to post it everywhere, and Mike Mulgrew said it as well. You do something right, you just keep hammering at it, and you're getting it done. And that's what we intend to do to the very end, without question and without fail. And we're not just doing it for Melva and for Abney. We're doing it for all of us, for our children, and for our future as a great city. We've got to rebuild, and I think it's really a great time for us to gather around, regardless of race and creed and religion and all the other stuff that's going on right now, and stand up and be counted, literally and figuratively. Melva, it's been an honor to be here, and I thank you very much for the opportunity.
And thank you, Tom, for joining us. You know, sort of having the business sector involved in this sometimes is missed by a lot of people, and it's often misunderstood the impact business can have, not only in the outreach effort, but also the other way around, right? Because when you take care of the community at large, right, they take care of you. So you take care of the people who live in New York City and New York State, they will take care of your business. So thank you so much for understanding that and getting that. I mean, you know, you're always very civically minded and ready to jump in. But I also want to thank you for your leadership and working with the rest of the city and the rest of the state to get the word out. So thank you, Tom.
My pleasure.
And next, we will hear from Samantha Tweedy. She is another one of my sisters in Census. And she is the chief.
I was wondering if I was making it onto the list today, Melva. Good.
I was going to say, I hope you have some brothers there
all of
too.
this, I'll make it onto the list. We'll see.
So Sam is the Chief Partnership and Impact Officer at Robin Hood Foundation. Robin Hood is New York's largest poverty-fighting organization. Since 1988, focused on finding, funding, and creating programs and schools that generate meaningful results for families in New York's poorest neighborhoods. And when we talk about New York's poorest neighborhoods, there's usually some overlap with the historically undercounted neighborhoods. Since its founding, Robin Hood has raised more than $2.5 billion in goods and services to provide hundreds of the most effective soup kitchens, homeless shelters, schools, job training programs, and other vital services that give New York's neediest citizens the tools they need to build better lives. And there's no other single funding source to these programs larger than the federal funds that come from the census. So it's no surprise that the census has become one of Robin Hood's primary focus efforts. In response to the expected undercount of the 2020 census, Robin Hood really spearheaded the 2020 census initiative, which is a three-pronged strategy, right? One, to allocate targeted grants to trusted community groups. Two, to provide their partners with the resources they need to get the count out, even in the wake of COVID-19. And three, really to share learnings and strategies and coordinate strategies with the field. Sam, can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you've done? And again, thank you for all that Robin Hood has done.
Well, thank you, Melva, for the leadership and for the very kind introduction. Like all of my colleagues, do want to start this conversation with a thank you. First, to all of you who are listening today. You know, it's clear to us when we had the chance to look through who all of you incredible people are, that you are a group of census activists, of leaders, of those who have been saying from day one, this is work that's critically important to our communities. I'm going to lean in here, and in no way getting swayed in the wake of the COVID crisis, in the wake of the nation's rapt attention around racial injustice. And we're just so grateful to you for that continued leadership on that front. I also want to say thank you to Mita and to New York Counts 2020 for convening us all in this moment. And we keep referencing this moment, but I just want to pause for a second on what I mean when I say in this moment. So yes, we watched a pandemic, a virus that so many referred to, it's now almost laughable, as the great equalizer in the early days, hit our communities in anything but an equal way. We've watched our communities that are most under-resourced suffer deaths at twice the rate. Now the newest data demonstrating that Black and Latinos dying at 3 times the rate. So that's, yes, the moment we're in. We're also in the moment where folks are asking across the board, what does recovery look like? And can a recovery look like a reimagination, a restructure, a rebuild? We're in a moment where we all stood and watched a police officer nonchalantly put his knee on the neck of a Black man, Mr. George Floyd, for 8 minutes and 40 seconds. We watched literally the life drain out of him. We also watched our country protest and rise up, and people of different stripes and colors and ages and geographies take to the streets and stay there. We watched everything from private actors and corporations to government entities make change. Enough change? No. Fast enough? No. Significant enough? No. Is it going to drive the kind of change for generations that I know all of us on this call hope will happen? TBD, but change. You know, we're in this moment where many folks are tuning into things like this on Facebook Live, that while the country's reopening, there's still this moment in time where through vehicles like this, driven by technology, we're able to come together and sort of be in community and talk about these things. And that so often the topics of those communications and those coming togethers are systemic change, and systemic change for the communities that are so often overlooked, that are disenfranchised, that have spent generations undercounted, yes, in census, but really in every definition of the word. And I just pause there to say thank you for bringing us together in this moment, because my deep hope is not simply that we all will continue on this sustained effort, but that we will continue on in, as so many of you are alluding to already doing in your own work, really this reimagined effort around what can this last sliver of time look like, you know, before our window closes, to leverage, really to take advantage of so much that came from horrific happenings and yet have created a different moment in time for our communities and for our city and for our country, to say, what does it look like for us to lean into this specific moment and see if we can get it right? Because as we all know, if any of us are distracted or don't stay the course, then this yes, decade-long, but truly generation impacting census, just it won't go the way we need it to. So thank you for bringing us together in this moment. As Melva so beautifully introduced, Robin Hood, yes, has been a poverty fighting, I hope you all can see my air quotes, they're important, organization for the last 30 years. And why I put them in air quotes is because what's been so important about the last couple years of Robin Hood is us really leaning in to say, for us to be truly a poverty fighting organization, we have to be thinking about sustainable mobility from poverty. Robin Hood runs a data tool with Columbia University called the Poverty Tracker. And what that data tool tells us is that while at any point in time, about 19 to 20% of New Yorkers at this point of time are facing poverty, that over the last 4 years, 50% of New Yorkers have spent at least 1 out of those 4 years experiencing poverty. 50%. And what the Poverty Tracker also tells us is that if you look at those who have gotten on and on pathways out of poverty and actually gotten above that line, that almost 50% of them have fallen back in within 3 years. And so what that really said to us organizationally, and I think to so many across the field, this is not to suggest that Robin Hood is in any way unique here, but looking at that data and at parallel national data, what we say is we have to be thinking about how we're supporting families on that pathway out of poverty, but also in ways that they will be able to stay there. And again, thinking back to this conversation about census and systems change, nothing is more important, right, than the federal funding, the representation that will allow for the communities that we're in service of to be supported. And so Melva, again, beautifully laid out our 3-pronged strategy. So just a couple notes on really the why of each of those. First, we knew we needed to move in partnership in anything we did around census. When we're thinking about the capital that we have to invest and how it can be most useful, when we think about whose voices can and should be elevated in this work, when we think about where we're leaning in community, it was critically important that we not only move in partnership, but that we also learn from partners, so many of whom are on this screen today, and many more, what the unique sort of value add was that we could bring to help further promote, support, elevate that work. And so one real area of partnership has been with United Way and Hester Street, around building asset maps to really map the leaders and communities who would be most well positioned to be able to do census outreach work and really lead community in those hardest to count or predicted to be hardest to count areas. As you'd imagine, that all sort of had to be revisited in terms of what it looked like with everyone and everything moving remote, but did want to share that, and I'm so glad to see that those will be presented on Friday. They're phenomenal, and just sort of also will be a tremendous resource to the field beyond census. The second thing was this microgrant strategy. You know, we asked a whole bunch of questions about which organizations would be least likely to get funding from other sources for a whole host of reasons, and then really narrowed in our investing our capital there. And the organizations that really needed a smaller amount of an investment to be able to do critically important outreach work. And so we funded about 70 community organizations across all 5 boroughs to lean in on that outreach work, and then really supported them and got incredibly flexible with them about how those plans needed to change in the wake of COVID and the new reality we were all in. And then the last thing I want to call out is that, you know, we at Robinhood right now are asking the question, what do these last months look like? We knew that philanthropy has a bit of a, I shouldn't even say a bit, philanthropy has a lot of opportunity to be more flexible around capital than, say, the city. And so we knew that there would be an opportunity for us to watch the data and to watch the work of our incredible partners and to say, you know, at this point in time, what's needed to get us over the hump, to get us to the finish line. And we were truly intending to do that even pre-COVID, sort of pre where our nation is right now and our city is right now, but that has only become more valuable. And so we've restarted a set of conversations with all of our partners to essentially do exactly what all of us are doing here today, which is to say, if we do everything that we can to attend to this moment, to make the biggest impact over this last chunk of time, what does that look like? So again, just thank you for this conversation. Thank you for having it this week and at this point in time. And thank you to so many of you on this screen who've just been invaluable in allowing us to help build a strategy that we think and hope has been entirely complementary of the rest of the city and advocacy community's efforts around ensuring a complete count.
Thank you, Sam. And yeah, I think you hit it right on the head in terms of sort of, you know, sort of working with us from the beginning to form a strategy. You know, I think from the very beginning, what I appreciate about Robinhood is that you've been very thoughtful in your process on how you design a strategy to assist the city, right? The partners on the ground, whether it's the government, right? The city, the state, on really figuring out the best fit for Robinhood. And I think you've been supportive on a number of different ways in a number of different sectors. And like I said, I really appreciate that thoughtfulness that you guys have put together to come up with some support as we do this work. And we know, right, we are moving, you know, even pre-COVID-19, we knew that there were going to be phases to this, but making sure that we have support in all of those phases in a real tangible way that really leverages all our work is really what Robinhood has done. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that, Melba.
My sister in Census. So before we go to our last, but definitely not least, speaker, I want to remind everyone, after Carlos speaks, we're going to open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions, I encourage you to either use the chat function or use the Q&A function, because we have a wealth of knowledge in front of us today. And I encourage you, as you do the work and as you are on the ground, to use some of the best practices and resources that they have to share. So just wanted to again remind you to add this into the chat box. So last but definitely not least is Carlo. He is the president and CEO of the New York Building Congress, a position that he's held since 2007. He and I worked together on the board of EDC when he was at, I guess it was the Brooklyn Borough President's office. He has had many prestigious appointments since then, including the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. The New York Building Congress, though, is a broad-based membership organization committed to the promoting and growth and success of the construction industry in New York City and its environment. The organization, which includes members from across the building community, provides a forum to advance an industry-wide agenda focusing on economic and infrastructure investment, job creation, and professional exchange. And we all know how important the census is for business and the construction industry, whereas the construction industry uses census data to make decisions about facility development and expansion, relocation, or other investments in infrastructure, efficiency in marketing and merchandising strategies, the labor market for hiring purposes, growth and risks, right? So the construction industry uses census data as much as anyone else across New York City. So not to mention, when New Yorkers are doing well, the construction industry also does well. So investing in a great response rate for the census here in New York City is also an investment in the construction industry. So with that, I'd like to ask Carlo to tell us a little bit about why he cares about the census and what it means.
Thank you. Thank you, Melva. Thank you. You are clearly a mover and shaker in this world. And I think we all feel that way about you. And it's great to be with really such an esteemed panel who I've worked with many of you from my days as chief of staff to the borough president, to the Brooklyn Chamber, and now at the Building Congress. You know, when you look at, and I think, Samantha, you really said it well, this moment. What's happening in Washington is there are clearly forces, and I'm only going to touch upon building and infrastructure in New York. There are forces in Washington in leadership roles that do not want to see New York and the New York region receive funding for things like rebuilding NYCHA, rebuilding our subway system, rebuilding our broadband into low-income communities, rebuilding our public schools, rebuilding our public hospitals. You know, I think sometimes when people think about infrastructure, they think, oh, they're building highways somewhere. Well, for us, infrastructure is not really highways somewhere, although there is some money going to highways, but it's really about the things I mentioned: public housing, affordable housing, mass transit, things of that nature. And when we don't fill out the census, when we don't encourage the people we represent to fill out the census, we lose money. We lose billions and billions and billions of dollars. And it doesn't translate just into poor housing services, poor education, poor mass transit. It also means less jobs, less money, less funding for the communities that we're all really trying to fight for. And I think particularly what we learned from COVID, just that, and I think, Jennifer, you talked about it, the numbers were staggering. I think, at least speaking for myself, I knew it, but seeing it in writing, understanding it, really frightened me. And it made me realize that as we push out all of our information on COVID, on what's happening in the city, it was clearly important to push out information about the census. You know, we are living in a very transformative time for our country, for our city, for our region. And again, I want to stress that there are people in power in this country that do not want to see New York get things, not only its fair share, but, and I don't remember who said it, but think about this: if we lose out on the census, it's 10 years before we get another crack at it. That means 10 years of disinvestment in NYCHA, of disinvestment in the MTA, of disinvestment in schools, in infrastructure, in broadband, and all of this. So, you know, we represent an organization with almost 1,000 members who represent about 350,000 workers in New York City alone, not counting the region. Construction workers, engineers, architects, people building schools, hospitals, things that we need every day. And we represent a large portion of workers who are undocumented, who really suffered during the COVID because they were not able to get the resources that other people got in this city. And I think, Jennifer, your point about, you know, government is asking me to fill out this form. Are you out of your mind? The last thing I'm going to do is give government any information. I think in the home stretch, if there's one thing we should all collectively commit to, is really helping people understand that this is not a bad thing. This actually is the opposite. This is something that is critical for all of our lives. And we are committed as an industry to really help lead that charge on our end.
Thank you so much, Carl. I was actually writing down a question based on what you just said. So that was really amazing. And thank you for making the connection about what type of infrastructure is supported by census data, and how sort of the construction industry uses the decennial census count to really reinforce the quality of life for New Yorkers, right? For everyone around the country. The census really is a connector of all aspects of life. So I'm just going to dive right in with questions, and then Meets is going to help me facilitate some of the Q&A that comes in. This is a question for
May I interrupt you for a second? I want us to have a chance to say goodbye to Jennifer, who actually has to leave us. So I wanted to make sure we had a chance to thank her for being part of this incredible panel. So sorry for interrupting you, but I wanted to give her her due.
I'm so honored to have been a part. I wish I could stay. I actually stepped out of one thing so that I could be here with you, because this is so critically important, but now I've got to jump back. I'm so sorry. See you all soon. Thank you.
For answering the questions. There were a lot of folks who wanted to be connected with the work that you do.
So interfaithcensus2020.nyc. And if you want to talk to me, jjaustin@fpwa.org. jjaustin@fpwa.org. Thank you. All the best.
I will put that in the chat box. Thank you, my sister in Census. So my first question is for President Mulgrew. With so much going on, and we talked about sort of being on the heels or in the middle, depending if we're, how we expect this next wave to come in for COVID-19, and then sort of what that did to uncover sort of the inequalities in society. And we saw that play out in the school systems with iPads and some schools being equipped and not. I think, as you look to September, and as there's conversations around whether or not schools are opening or they're not going to be opening, what are some of the ways you are thinking about communicating the census to parents in the middle of everything else, right? In the middle of all of these other things? What are some of the strategies that you are thinking about could sort of really land and really come home for parents about this importance when they're thinking about all these other things?
So that's a great question. So throughout this shutdown and now during the summer, going into the beginning of August, we'll be planning a series of town halls with parents. I get an average of about 2,000. I do a geographic area at a time, so I get an average of about 2,000 parents. We basically break boroughs up into 2 or 3 different geographic areas. And one of the things we talk about is like the whole idea of when we got to go to remote, we had to quickly get almost 300,000 iPads out to students who had no basic technology equipment at home. That should have never been. And I remember all the years I've been trying to get that funded. Everyone always said to us, oh, you can't give children that equipment. They're going to lose it. They're going to do that. We had no problems. We had no problems. I think we lost 3 iPads. Just imagine, we actually were able to distribute. It was close to 260,000 were distributed. Children in homeless shelters all over the different. This should not happen because of a pandemic. This should have been in place. Yeah. This should have already been done. And that's the type of thing that when I'm talking to parents, that's why I talk to them about the census. Like, but we need you to get that census done, because I don't want to be put in that position again. I want to make sure that every household has access to free broadband for their child to use. They have to have Wi-Fi. We're all in the Zoom world now, right? So if you have 3 children in a household and we have to work with each one of them individually remotely, there is no way for them to do that right now. Right. So these are the type of things that we are communicating with the parents, as well as, because they want to talk to us. They all want to tell us what they think about whether schools should be open or not, and what they want, which is which is absolutely, I love hearing those things. And most people think like, he must be nuts saying that. No, because that's what we're into this, to interact with parents and talk to them about things. And there's real fear and anxiety. I mean, you know, look how many people died in New York City, and how many of those were part of our own members died, and how many of our families died in terms of our children's families. They had so many deaths. So to us, we're using this as we're moving towards school to talk about the HEROES Act, the census, and all these things. So New York is pivotal in terms of we're loud. And I mean, what Carlos said before is, it's clear right now that, you know, thank God we have parents from New York City now who are working with parents from other states, the red states. And what have they found common ground on a lot of places? Schools and the fact that they want them to be safe. But for us, it's always about, when we're talking to the parents, we want your child to have everything they deserve. And especially now, because we don't know how long we're going to be in this situation. Let's all just be honest. We have no idea. We could be opening, closing, opening, remote, going back and forth for at least for years. We could be doing this. So this is going to require quite a bit of funding, and that's why this is important. And if you've noticed at the federal level, the type of educational platforms they're talking about are all based on Title I funding. Title I funding directly tied to the census, hands down, that's it. So that's the type of communication we've been doing with parents, and we're going to continue to do as we move forward, especially since they definitely want to talk to us about the opening of school.
I'm sure. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for sort of pointing out a very specific example of the census funding and how you can tie the messaging to make it important, that Title I funding, right? And, you know, sort of coming up with those concrete examples. And, you know, to Carlos' point earlier about trying to convince folks that this is not a bad thing, right? This is something that is important, not only important, but will help you in your everyday life, I think is part of the message that we need to create in our different sectors, in our different spaces. But in addition to the messaging, it's the messenger, right? It is the, how do we identify the influencers in our individual space who can communicate that. So my next question is for all of the speakers. When we think about influencers, right, I'm really interested to hear who are the influencers in your sectors, right? Who can we activate in your communities, meaning community of philanthropy, community of business, community of construction, community of education and labor, to really talk about the importance of the census in a way that resonates. Because it's great to have celebrities to do PSAs, because there's, you know, a group of people who will listen to them, but there are the micro influencers in sectors and communities that can really make the difference. So if you all would mind, I'm really interested in learning more about the influencers in your sectors and how we can activate them, whether it's giving them the tools, just making the ask, to get them to talk to their networks about the census.
I mean, I will jump in on, before I answer that question, just on one important thing, Melva, and you mentioned the real examples of what happens if we don't fill out the census. So, you know, the average person, when you say, well, New York may lose 1 or 2 congressional seats, they have it means nothing to them, right? Okay. What does that mean? One less politician, right? You know, right now it's get rid of them all, I'm happy, right? But when you say, and I think President Mulgrew, who by the way, I've been a huge fan of his, as he knows, for a long time. When you say, do you understand that children in New York City, think about this, the global capital of finance and technology, don't have access to broadband. The subway that you're already complaining about is about to get much worse, because if we don't get federal dollars, you're going to have to walk longer to a subway station because they may have to shut certain subway stations. And, you know, the examples go on and on. So I think, Melva, all of us need to really, really bring home those specific quality of life, impactful things that can happen to New York City residents if we don't fill out the census. And I just wanted to make that point. In terms of influencers, I think Jennifer said it best. The faith community is very critical. I think in our end, we're going to start reaching out to different people on sites because, you know, a lot of people that work on construction sites, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands across the city, have not filled out the census. But they go in, they talk to their foreman, they talk to the people on the site. We got to figure out, how do we get census forms on site? How do we get census forms to the engineers, the architect, the planners, the developers, really everybody across the spectrum? And I think, at least from our end, that's where we can be helpful.
I'd also add that I think this is a moment where, in addition to going deep on the messengers that we sort of would have anticipated, so we were always relying on not only our experience with nonprofit organizations, knowing how trusted they are in communities, but also the Quinnipiac poll, where folks were asked across New York, you know, who would you trust most when it came to filling out the census? Would it be the radio, the media, politicians, et cetera, houses of worship? And 46% said it was local community organizations, that was a place to dive in. And I think one of the other places where we partnered with United Way and Hester Street was around hosting convenings of community organizations by borough to really ask questions about how things were going in light of COVID and what strategies needed to change. And I think we heard echoed back from those convenings, you know, sort of what was expected there, that it really is the person who you're seeing every day when you pick your kid up, or who you're seeing every week, you know, when you go in, you know, for that healthcare interaction, right? Or every month, you know, when you go and do that special after school or weekend program with your family, that those folks who already had those relationships with you, talking to you about census, not only would motivate you to do it because there's some personal ask that comes to those conversations, but also that breaks down so much of that fear that Jennifer Jones-Austin was talking about around government, and that we know was already so heightened, you know, in immigrant communities, for example, you know, even pre-COVID. And so I think, Melva, to your question about what we need to do more of there, I think it really is, you know, sort of it's the going back, you know, from Robin Hood's perspective, it's looking at which of our community organization grantees, we had, you know, about 70 that we already funded, and saying who's most effective here, what are they already seeing, and leaning in to say, we see you, we support you, and while you've got so much other, you know, work and areas of focus on your plate, you know, we want to partner with you in this home stretch. I also think that we all need to be, and I don't mean to be a broken record here about this moment, but I think we all need to be looking ourselves in the mirror and saying, you know, what has changed? So for example, all the data shows, right, that there are so many folks who are closer to the data than I am, but that there are areas in Manhattan that we never thought would be low performing, right, which are because everyone left the city. And so when I think about Robin Hood, you know, Robin Hood sets this really, you know, interesting and unique nexus of community and community organizations, and also philanthropy and corporate and business, et cetera. You know, we're now sitting there and sort of putting our heads together around whether there's a real avenue for us to be, you know, influencing, getting the messaging out to our donor community, right? Who might be in some of those neighborhoods that now are so critical to all of New York and to our mission focus around hard to count area, but who we need to fill out those census forms just as much. And so I think that is, again, saying, well, where are we uniquely now, and where can each of us who are already playing a role in here potentially have an avenue that might look different to be those messengers for folks who we still really need to fill out the form.
And I think that's a great point. And Melva, I think what Samantha's saying is critical. We all have donor bases that we fundraise with and go after for different things. And I think there's, you know, 200 organizations across the city that have those type of donor bases. We all need to focus on those people and get them engaged in the census, because they may not be coming back by November. They may, you know, decide to stay where they are for a few more months or whatever. So that's a whole other level. Thank you for bringing that up, Samantha.
I just wanted to comment too, if I can, about the obvious about healthcare. Clearly, we're never going to build enough hospitals or facilities to handle something like a spike that we had with COVID. But in a place like Queens, where we have one of the highest concentrations of folks over the age of 62, one of the highest concentrations of veterans living here, healthcare is an essential piece like never before, right? We're building hospitals at the Javits. We're building field hospitals at the Billie Jean King Stadium. It was hard to even comprehend. But the notion of not having enough beds in certain areas or enough equipment that the hospitals had to buy should really come right home to roost when it comes to the census, right? The funding that we get from the feds through that is critically important. And I think everybody obviously was impacted by the COVID. And then as Mr. Mulgrew said too, regarding the schools, I mean, having those iPads, having that technology should not have been COVID dependent at all. And whether those are people of color or across the entire spectrum in our New York City school system and others, having that kind of technology in place really transcends things like race and gender and so on. And having those tools, because people decide to definitely participate in the census, is critically important. Melva, you're muted.
Thank you, Tom.
I was waiting for you to call me a brother.
Really good at that. I'm usually really good at that. But no, thank you for that. And, you know, when, you know, sort of Sam thanks New York Counts 2020 and Mita for putting this on in this moment in time, you know, a lot of the thinking around this was looking at how New York City is looking to rebuild after this, right? So, you know, we really wanted to sort of talk about sort of how the census sort of plays a role in that rebuilding and rebounding of New York City, New York State, and the country after this unprecedented health crisis on top of everything else that we are going through. And with that, I just wanted to turn this back to Tom and ask, you know, really as we enter phase 3 and we're looking to enter phase 4 of New York State opening up, you know, the business community has had a very turbulent time in this and supports so many efforts where government cannot, right? So where we have the public sector would usually sort of step up and philanthropy will step up and sort of deal with some of these quality of life issues. That might not be the case because of funding and budgetary issues, right? And it's really the private sector, the business sector that would usually come in and sort of lend a hand. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the work that we see, the possible influence that business can play, even in this sort of economic downturn on some of their books, right? Really playing a role in, again, talk about the importance of the census, talk about how the census helps businesses, and knowing that they're dealing with what they're dealing with.
Sure, happily. So I sadly, one of the stats we keep hearing about, and I keep talking about, not to be a naysayer here, but we have 6,000 restaurants in Queens County, and we sadly estimate that up to half will never again see the light of day. And that's just not me pandering or me begging for money or me trying to get people's attention. That's a fact. And as everybody knows, whether you're in Brooklyn or anywhere else, Staten Island, the Bronx, Manhattan, restaurants are the mainstay. They define neighborhoods, right? You go to those places and they define places. I'm on the phone with the woman that owns Melba's. I'm on the phone with the folks that own the Door in Jamaica. And there's a real hurt out there. And so part of what we're trying to do is to marshal resources to make sure people understand the importance of those things as drivers of the community. And we're also engaging the local community as well, beyond just the shop local, buy local, but to actually understand the ramifications. And I'm happy to tell you that while we're out there visiting all the different bids and knocking on doors, we bring along information in, I don't know how many languages you've created for the census to give it out as well. And certainly it's not a cure-all, but we've let people know the importance of that. And getting the business community together to kind of drive the bus on some of these things is critically important.
Thank you, Tom. And we have a few questions regarding resources, right? So as we look to target certain neighborhoods that are really trailing behind in terms of self-response rate, if we look at the Latino community, if you look at the immigrant communities, if you look at the communities of color, can, you know, I'm opening up to anyone, could you point to some of the resources that are available? Like, for instance, Carlo talked about how, you know, the census really supports infrastructure. President Mulgrew talked about, you know, the census supporting schools. You know, can someone talk a little bit about sort of the resources that are available? Mita, if you want to talk about the resources that New York Counts 2020 provides in the multiple languages that are culturally competent, that sort of give those specific examples like Carlo was talking about on how the census affects the quality of life of our everyday lives.
Can I take a stab at that one?
Sure.
So one of the people that you know very well, Dennis Walcott, that runs the Queens Public Library System, right? A terrific guy, 64 library branches in Queens County, this is one of those great cases of doing well by doing good, right? The dollars you may save might be your own. So I know Dennis has worked very hard and in conjunction with the chamber before the COVID for programming and in-house and on-site activities to promote it. But he really gets it, and we intend to work, and we have been working alongside him and the staff of the Queens Public Library System to get the word out. But what a great place to say, you know, the library system you save, the books you may be able to buy. And again, I happen to be the treasurer of my local little library board where I live, and they're no longer places for just books and magazines, right? They're community centers, they're knowledge bases, they're powerful, powerful places. And I think it's a great place, especially in a place like New York City and Queens in particular, with the language barriers, they kind of go away in a place like that.
I'm going to jump in here because that was a great segue, because before we answer any more questions, I want to make sure I get a bunch of thank yous in because I want people to hear the thank yous. And the reason I think that's a great segue is one of the people that helped put this entire conference together is Jin Bay from the Queens Public Library. I want to thank her. I want to thank Hillary Medina Loveless from Census Counts, which is the national campaign arm of the Leadership Conference, Carlos Rosales from the Citizens Committee for Children, Natalie Bernstein at the New York Immigration Coalition, and Aaron Flores from Bibliosol. And of course, I want to thank Melva from ABNY and Samantha from Robin Hood and Carlo, I suddenly forgot the name of your organization.
New York Building Congress.
New York Building Congress, President Mulgrew from UFT, and of course, Tom Gretsch from the Queens Chamber of Commerce. So what I want to do though is also thank you, Melva, for saying, feel free to jump in. New York Counts 2020, New York Counts, nycounts2020.org has a bunch of resources in a whole range of languages. It's a searchable website. And we are also now asking people if there are specific items they want. We're exploring the opportunity of printing it and delivering it to people if we can find access points where we can distribute them. So we do want to make that material available. ABNY has great material. The Census Bureau has incredible material and they make it available to people. So go to the Census Bureau website. If it's too complicated, we've curated some of what we think is their best material. And New York City has developed some great material. So in terms of resources, there are tons available. I'm sure people on this call know of others, but if you just want to stick with, you know, 3 in your head, New York Counts 2020, ABNY, and the Census Bureau.
I also want to address the resources where you can find. No, okay. So there's also a question regarding incentives for taking the census. You know, from day one, I think that has come up. I'm just going to jump in and say, you know, people love free stuff. And the incentive can be as simple as a census tote bag. I have seen one person bring 6 people to me for a free tote bag to complete their census form. So whereas you cannot, the government or the Census Bureau cannot pay someone to complete the census because it's required by law, one could absolutely incentivize people to complete their census by giving them free stuff. So I think that that is a great way to encourage people to take the census. And I would like to now turn it over to Mita. I know she had some closing remarks.
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, once again, I've done my thank yous to the panelists. Want to say thank you one more time. Thank you, Melva. Thank you, County Executive Steve Ballone. We have 2 more days of this conference going on, and they are going to be different, I promise. So tomorrow is redistricting day. And a lot of people don't realize, like, we do all this just to get to the next step. And the next step is the redistricting step, where we determine the boundaries of who is being represented. And, you know, we want to be able to choose our representatives, not have our representatives choose us. So that's the redistricting process. And that is huge. And we have a fabulous panel that is going to explain the redistricting process and how important and critical it is to us. And everything we're talking about now that flows into it. And then on Friday, after you've hopefully been motivated by this panel and the joys of redistricting, we are going to talk about different outreach methods, making sure that we use the time between now and August 11th, which is when the door knockers come. We really want to get that rate out between now and August 11th. So we really want to encourage everyone to join tomorrow, to join Friday, but more importantly, to make sure everyone you know has filled out the census. So once again, thank you so very, very much to all of our panelists, to the fabulous Melva. And, you know, gentlemen, I hope I'm allowed to call you brothers in Census at this point, since we did.
Melva, I was a little hurt when you did brother.
Yeah, I was kind of feeling the same way.
You know, but it's okay.
What's coming?
It hurt. It hurt.
Melva, I always thought I was your Sicilian brother. Come on.
You are.
All right.
My brother.
I feel better.
So we've now established that this is a census family, and we want to make that family as broad and wide as possible. So thank you to absolutely everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.